Charlene Helm is a co-founder of the Challenge Queens and founder of What Mama Says About Grief. Her father was a charismatic, self-proclaimed Dr. Love type of guy who seemed to be on top of so many aspects of his and his family's life that when his sudden depression replaced the vitality in his eyes with a hollow look and emptiness, and although Charlene saw this and checked in with him, when he subsequently decided to take his own life, it did come as a massive shock to Charlene. We speak about the grief and the journey through the vortex of devastation, as well as the children's book Charlene wrote as a direct response to helping children understand and cope with the after effects of suicide. In our discussion, you will hear much laughter and sadness, as is often the case with the ups and downs we all experience encompassed in our life experience. I have left some of the preceding conversation in this episode's relevance to the ensuing discussion. Charlene's book, What Mama Says About Grief, you will hear her read her book to us towards the end of the interview, which is a beautiful way to round off the discussion. I'd like to quote a few lines from that book. Mama says that some feelings are heavy and other ones feel light. Some help me go to sleep, while others keep me up at night. Mama says writing down my worries or colouring about how I feel, scribbling out my angry thoughts, these things help me heal. With my background in using artwork and discussion to help heal from my own trauma, I felt it was important to quote those particular lines. The whole book is just gorgeous, and every time I listen to Charlene read this, it touches somewhere very special in my own heart. And I know so many of you will get much, much, much warmth and love out of this interview. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Charlene Helm, founder of What Mama Says About Grief and co-founder of the Challenge Queens. Charlene is a children's book author and an early childhood educator. She is also an intuitive spiritual practitioner who specialises in helping women move from the pain and loss to discovering passion and purpose in their lives. This is something Charlene knows all too well, the healing journey. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Charlene.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here on your show.
It's wonderful to have you here today. And we ask a few big questions here first, such as what would you not have as a pet and why?
You know, the first thing that came to mind, I wasn't expecting that question. I went with alligator. That's the first thing that came to my head.
Yeah. Yep. I've had that one come up a couple of times.
Have you?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it just popped in my head right away. So I'm like, I'm just going to roll with that. An alligator. Yeah. An alligator. Why? It's aggressive. Mm-hmm. Snappy. Mm-hmm. Snappy is the word that came to mind. I know you're going to analyze this somehow, but I'm really curious about how it comes back. Yeah. It's cold. It's unapproachable.
Mm. Definitely
Not
has.
cuddly. I like cuddly soft things.
Yeah, yeah, they're definitely not cuddly. I think alligators and crocs in Australia here we get crocodiles, and they get actually a lot more muscly, and they're a much sort of more mean looking animal, I suppose, or not animal, reptile. They're reptile. But as juveniles, they're actually quite cute. And they're actually a lot of fun as juveniles. But yes, as soon as they grow into that teenagerhood, it's like, yeah, go away. You can go back to the wild. So I'd love to know, if you had to choose one book that has impacted your life the most, what would it be?
Hmm. The Saint, the Surfer, and the CEO.
Oh, I
And
haven't heard of
also
that
Eat,
one.
Pray, Love at the same time, because one was a male's perspective and one was a female's perspective. But they both, um, it's the three-part journey that attracts me. So I know I was only supposed to pick one, but I picked two.
That's okay. I like that. So you've got both sides
Yeah.
of a similar journey. Wow.
Actually, I had a friend recommend it to me. I had just moved back into my parents' house. So I had been on a journey for a number of years on my own. I left home early on and went on we'll call it a colorful adventure. And then I decided I was going to come back and give life a try in a different way. And when I did, I met this girl named Nikki. She was my brother's girlfriend at the time. And we really got along and had a different conversation, a bigger level. And I felt she really understood me. It was just that really substantive conversation. She said, you know what? This book is really impacting my life in a positive way. I want you to read it. And so she handed it over to me and I was hooked. It was The Saint, the Surfer, and the CEO. And I was hooked right away into that journey. And I really appreciated the reflection. I've done personal development my entire life. So maybe that's what hooked me in. And then Eat, Pray, Love was a little bit afterwards. And I just remembered back The Saint, the Surfer, and the CEO. And I found just a similar journey, exactly. But the male and female perspective, I was like, oh, this is so neat because I get two different ends of it. And then I kind of find where my middle ground is in relation to that. Because I've led quite a journey, you know?
Wow, I love that. And there's so much to be said about embracing both the feminine and masculine within us, because we all have a bit of both. And I love that you found two books, similar journey, and somewhere within that you've discovered your own journey of bits of both. That's so cool. My book list, I'm asking quite a few of my guests about this question, and my book list is growing exponentially.
You can see I have a little bit of a book issue too.
You do.
Let me know your book list. I'm in. Your book club.
Absolutely. I think I may need to start a page on my website for the recommended books, because it is really becoming quite an awesome thing. Yeah. And reading is so important, as we know, for many reasons. I mean, just quickly, what do you get out of reading different books? You know, why do you love reading so much?
I love reading. For me, it's relaxing. I look to books like Super Soul Sunday. Super Soul Sunday was one of my favorite shows because she would interview authors. So I got all the good books, but I liked hearing about well, for the same reason as you have your show, I like seeing how people met adversity in their lives and they learned how to find their purpose through it and meaning in it. Because I found that that's happened to me multiple times in my life in a wide array. And I'm like, you know, why was I chosen to go through all of these different things? What is the bigger purpose in my life? What is it that's unique about me to share? And I recognize that there is something there. But what is it that's meant for me to offer back into the world? And so going through these books, I'm able to piece together things that make sense for me and gives me a language for the feelings that my experiences inside to come out. And the thing with it is I feel, this is going to sound weird. Actually, I've never heard this come out of my mouth before, but it's coming out, so I'll share it. Sometimes I feel like the books understand me more than people do. You know, like even though the people that read them, I've struggled a lot in my life in this part of my life to find the conversation that I'm thirsty for in my soul. And I found it through literature. until recently. And then more recently, I found it in fellow heart-led entrepreneurs. And so I feel full that way that I do from my reading. So it's a long answer, but it's interesting because it just surfaced for sharing. So
it's a great answer, a great response, and so in tune with where you're at. And I love that, because I myself have always been an avid reader, and I used to actually read to avoid talking to people. And I know, doesn't that sound crazy? Here I am doing what I do now. I was very much a shy kid, and I used to go and play tennis tournaments, and my parents worked, so they would drop me off, and I would often be the first person there waiting at the gate for them to let everyone in. And I would spend all day being in this environment with all these other kids that I didn't know how to relate to. I didn't understand how to communicate with. And so I would sit there and read books until I learned that those skills of how to actually start conversations with other kids. And it wasn't like I didn't know how to do that, because I had brothers and sisters. However, I always felt that it was a little difficult to fit into what was the socially accepted culture, I suppose, of the kids around me. So until I learned those skills, books were my best friends. But there is so much you can learn from them, so much.
I was like that as a child, though, too. I was always an avid reader as a child, too. And I like the adventure. I remember when I was growing up, my favorite books were the Your Own Adventure, where you got to, like, you picked an ending and you're like,
They're the best.
that again.
They're the best. We had the Indiana Jones ones. Which ones did you have?
I can't remember what they were. I just remember the Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah.
That and Nancy Drew.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. My very first thing that I ever bought myself with my own, like, massively over time saved up pocket money was a Nancy Drew hardcover box set. I adored it. And unfortunately, it got lost in one of our many moves over the years. But, I read those books so many times. They were the best.
Aren't they fun? They're so fun. You know what's funny is later on in my life, I became a private investigator. I wasn't good at doing actual surveillance. There's some very funny stories of that. But
okay, another time.
I could do it behind the scenes. But I thought that was really interesting because I love the problem solving and the strategic thinking and stuff. So I found that really interesting when I looked back and I was like, oh, Nancy Drew. Maybe that's for it for me.
Maybe. I'm sure that those books inspired many adventures and investigations by girls and boys alike. They were fantastic books. Yeah. All right. Well, I think I'd like to hear more about your story, Charlene. How about you tell us a little bit about your WhyMe moment?
Well, there was a few to choose from. The one I've decided to share today was about my father's suicide. So I experienced 18 deaths over 5 years, and it was multiple suicides, my uncle's homicide, many substance abuse related deaths, cancer, and literally all of the family pets. So my daughter, I'm a single mother. My daughter was one at the time. My dad took his life a week before Christmas. And it came really, I mean, it's all usually unexpected. I mean, there's some circumstances, but in this situation, my dad was a private investigator and he helped coach people back into love. Like he recognized that people in matrimonial situations, so they may have an affair or whatever. And once he always said, you know, he's shining a light on the darkness. So he was illuminating what was happening. And once it's exposed, it has the opportunity for healing or for release. And sometimes people wanted to heal through it because it wasn't for a lack of love necessarily. Sometimes there was a possibility for reconciliation. So he saw an opportunity there to help people because he genuinely loved people, like loved people. You knew what my dad talked to you. He would talk to you, look at you, and make you feel like you were the only person on the planet. He hung on every word. So very magnetic and powerful that way. And people really felt seen and heard by him. Mm-hmm. I had a tougher relationship with him. But everybody else has had that experience with him. And I saw it too. Right? He was super charismatic. He had a very big personality, like a Robin. I always described like a Robin Williams character because he was super unpredictable, but funny and charismatic. And so he experienced a depression. Oh yeah. And he was a self-proclaimed Dr. Love. Like this was a big deal. Like he would even dress up like it, like over the top, like this, one of those characters. Yeah. So he went through a very quick depression, like a few months. It was around September. I remember when I noticed, and he had a really, I say a vacant look in his eyes. Like he's always very vibrant. And, we all have that sparkle, that glow in our eyes, we're excited people. But this look was hollow and vacant. And I caught it and it really stood out to me. It was almost as if it was a different person. It was interesting. And his energy level came down. It was very confusing because his energy level came down to a point where we felt he was more manageable. So we're like, well, we can handle this.
Right. Yeah.
But there was clearly something wrong. And because our relationship was tougher, I took it as a disinterest with me. And so I was very easily offended at the time. I was, very, very different from what I am now. So at any rate, he had this kind of a hollow and vacant look on him. And I remember looking at him in the kitchen one day. I went over to visit my parents and he was in the kitchen. I was just looking at him and what is going on with you? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, are you okay? And he just looked at me and he smiled. I can't tell you what that look was, but it was just like there's a knowing look, but it was eerie. Like it was like he knew that I knew, but he couldn't express it. I don't even know how to describe it. And I just remember my mom jumped in. He hadn't said anything. My mom jumped in. She goes, we don't know what's going on. And it was just, we moved on from the conversation, but it really stood out to me. And it was a week before Christmas. My dad loved Christmas. And what happened was I had a small daycare at the time, taking care of a couple of children on that day in particular. There was only one. And with my daughter, we went out and I was supposed to drive by my parents' house. I made a routine to bring the kids by and say hi during the day because again, they're fun. Yeah. And I got this really strong feeling to drive by the house, but the children weren't feeling well. So I was like, oh, I'll just take them back to the house instead. And I rerouted. And it's about a 5-minute drive. I left my phone in the vehicle. I walked in the house and put the children in, just grabbed my phone. And when I grabbed my phone, I saw that I missed a call from my mom. And when I picked up the phone and heard the message, she said, Charlene, your dad shot himself. Call me. And I was like, and I remember getting that message and it felt like my world tunneled around me, like a vortex. I felt numb, just like kind of like Twilight Zone. And I just started to spin and I just remember screaming. And I know that's not the best response when you have children, but you don't get to choose how you respond in those situations. Yeah. Luckily, a neighbor was there, so she supported me with the children, helped me make the calls. I called my brother, and we started to, we made arrangements for the children to get taken care of and stuff. And my family came over, and it just was so confusing because it was so different from who my father was, and he didn't. That was left field. There was no warning signs. And so being the private investigator I am, I almost drove myself crazy. My dad is like me. He used to write down every little detail. I'll tell you what, I scoured the computers. I scoured estate planners. That why was smothering me. I couldn't find anything. And I remember people were like, Charlene, you got to stop. Like I was so distracted by my confusion. I just could not wrap my head around this, that I felt super distracted in my parenting. And at this point, we had moved in with my mom, my daughter, and I so that we could support her. But this confusion, wow, I can't even explain how, it's so consuming. And so for me, so I went on a hunt. Eventually I found a clue. I couldn't find anything except for on December 4th, stopped writing so much. And that was it. There was one date that said cancer and it was circled with a no. And so I was like, oh, it looks like he was on a journey. He's trying to figure something out for himself. But on that day, he stopped writing. So for me, I realized that on that day, what I found peace with, is that on that day, he had started to make a decision, or had made a decision for himself. And it was on the 17th when he shot himself in the backyard on a Monday morning. So that's what started, which started this spiral of a number of deaths. A couple months later, I heard of an ex-boyfriend's sister who had also shot herself, and she felt like an extended family member to me. I really loved his family, so that was devastating. And another ex-boyfriend had gone missing for a week in Hawaii and had gone over a suicide as well. My uncle got shot in the Nanaimo Mill shooting. It just went on and on and on. A grandmother, a death by cancer. It just wouldn't stop, so much to the point where I was like, enough. I get it. I meant to share a message to stop the death. It was just so much. And I couldn't get on top of it. And so I remember I looked back actually through my writing when I was a movement maker. And I looked back through my writing to see what my emails were at the time, because I already had a certain amount of education, lots of personal development my whole life. My parents had really brought me up well that way with that conversation. So I had something to work with already, but I felt veiled between my heart and my head, and I didn't know how to connect again. And I wanted to re-experience through my words how I was reaching out for help. And when I looked back through, I was like, man, I was really articulate. I was really aware. I'm doing this and this and this for myself, all of the health practices, but I really needed help in the area of support. With my daughter is saying, I'm feeling disconnected. I needed somebody who understood what I was going through, who could just put their hand out to me and just say, you're going to be okay. You will eventually get through this, or some sign of hope. But I wasn't finding that anywhere. And I ended up finding a bereavement group that I went to twice, once for my ex-boyfriend Sean's suicide, and one for my dad's death, which were both really hard for me to move through.
Yeah.
And that group, I found peace. And in the first group, when I went for my dad, is when my book was birthed, because I was already taking care of children. And even though my daughter was one, I felt this really strong urge to make sure that my feelings didn't confuse her. And I know it's only a 1-year-old, but she's not going to understand what I'm saying, but I just felt that need to start that conversation early. And so I looked to literature, because it's always helped me, and I couldn't find what I needed there. And everything that I found were books that spoke about an analogy, the purple balloon or whatever the case was at the time. Now there's more options, all these years later. But back then there wasn't. And so I wanted to illustrate a process of healing. And I remember talking to my group. I'm like, I'm just going to write one myself. And so I kind of dropped the seed, went on a run, which is a part of my healing journey. The first verse of the book came to me when I was halfway through my run. So I was about 2.5K into it. And I was like, and then I had to chant it to myself, run all the way home, and sat down with a pen and paper and wrote the book. Wow. And then published it. And so publishing the book and going through that process were a huge integral part of my healing process, because I got to revisit what's working for me, what isn't, and develop a language and illustrate. And trying to illustrate a process of healing is tricky. I don't know how to draw to save my life. Like, I admire that that's your thing. Like, I mess up stick people. So I had to articulate what my vision was, what I'm trying to convey. And then I connected with an illustrator through my spiritual group who exceeded expectations. She just really was able to over deliver and serve in that way, where we met each other at a beautiful place, and in that co-creation, my book was birthed. So,
wow, there is so much in that, Charlene. I want to thank you so much for sharing what you have already, and I'd like to touch on a few of those areas of what you spoke about. So there's a lot of grief here. There's grief coming at you from all sorts of angles and so many deaths. I personally have dealt with the death of very close loved ones. I've not dealt with multiple deaths, one after the other. And suicide in itself is a different way of those who are left here trying to heal through that, because there is such a big question of why. And you said it yourself, your dad was a PI, you've been a PI. You want to know the why. And so often we do not get that opportunity. It's not laid out to us in a detailed book. This is why. And I would like to know your thought on why that is, particularly when you mentioned that your dad liked to shine the light. He liked to bring forth what wasn't being said.
Yeah.
And here he basically shut down and did not allow any light into what was going on, leading up directly to him taking his life. I'd love to know what you think about that, in that he's all his life made it his mission and his vision to shine that light and help find those answers for people, and yet he did the exact opposite when it came to his own life and his own family.
Yeah, thanks for my feeling with that, and what keeps coming up for me over the years is, wasn't that he wasn't shining it. He lost his light. Remember I said at the beginning, his eyes sparkled. He lost his light. And remember, I've done a lot of work with this. So some people are probably like, whoa, how can you speak of it so freely like this? Please understand, for anyone who's listening, I have worked really deeply with this. So I don't want to trigger anybody with it. But for me, I think he died before he died. And where he died from is, in my opinion, I'll never know. And where the surrender comes is in understanding that who am I to play God, so to speak. If anybody else is like, I don't know what his experience was. I do know that my dad always had a vision. He loved people, and he loved to breathe spiritual vision into them. He liked to connect their head mind with their heart mind, is language that he would use. He really liked to help people connect. So it's very interesting that he was a healer person. He was very sensitive. And in fact, all of the people who had chosen to take their life were also a similar personality. So I am noticing in my life that there's a trend that way, and sensitive to that. So the one thing that he couldn't do, and I remember him expressing before he passed on and leading up to it, he was really frustrated with technology. He was frustrated. He was still doing things by pen and paper. We would joke around that he was still archaic that way. Really old school. But we were trying to catch him up, but technology was advancing faster than he could keep up with it. And we're all busy with our own lives. And so we couldn't help him with that. And he was involved in tons of different activities, like he was the area governor for Toastmasters, and you name it. Like, he just gave and gave and gave everywhere. But the one area that he wanted to be in, he wanted to be a motivational speaker, and he did do professional training. He went quite high up, and he had his own speaking group. But he really wanted to be that big stage, that Tony Robbins, where he could really impact a lot of people on a large scale. And so what I find peace with is perhaps, because we all need something to hold on to. And what makes sense for me is maybe he died of a passion early. He died of a passion unrealized. His light went out, his inner light went out, and I saw that in his eyes. And so he died before he ever put the gun to his head. And so what that taught me was to never lose my light. Not only me, but it kills me to see anybody suffocated by circumstance. Don't lose your light. It's important. Catch where you're at in your life, where you're feeling stagnant, you're feeling dull, uninspired, where you're feeling that resistance, where are you resisting? Our life is meant to be experienced. And that can be scary. And that's where I think a big lesson too is to really sit back in that realization, whose life are you living? Are you really living intrinsically for you? Which reminds me of Sean. Sean and he left a suicide note. So we had some idea that it was happening. He had a suicide note that he posted on Facebook. That was a goodbye to everybody. He had a huge following. And it was like a love letter back to us that said, I'm too sensitive for this world. And he was going to join the synchronicity of the stars. And he left a call to action to make sure that we checked our motives of the heart and to make sure that what we're doing is intrinsically ours and not focused on outside circumstance. And from the moment I read those words, and then a week later they had found him, I've taken that as a beautiful goodbye. It was something that I hold on to. It doesn't trigger me in a negative way. I look at it as a beautiful gift to carry forward, to really make sure that I'm in alignment with what I want in my life. And I've had to check myself multiple times. And the only way I can check myself is by really sitting in my heart and going, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I jumping out of bed? If I'm not jumping out of bed, now I have to wonder why and really check myself and figure out, how am I going to get that joy back? Because I don't want to end up like my dad. I don't want to end up like Sean. I don't want to live my life. And what if nobody notices?
Yeah.
This is another big one, actually.
It's a very big one.
What if nobody notices? If you want to drop this one, then feel free to jump in. But this was a huge one for me. So we didn't notice with my dad. I didn't notice with Sean. I didn't notice with anybody else because they've got big personalities. Well, I do too, as you can tell. I'm not shy. So I didn't know what depression looked like in me. And I'm like, well, if we didn't notice in him, how are other people going to know? So what I learned to do is to study myself. And I learned that when I started dropping strategies that I put in my life that would keep me healthy and on a wellness journey, that I would do well in life, no matter where the ebb and flow is, because it's going to. I accept that this life's going to have its ups and downs. And as long as I have a good health and wellness plan, I'm going to surf that, no problem. I may be taking a little bit, but not as bad as if I don't. So what I did as a strategy was...
It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision.
On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
I told a couple of my closest friends, and I said, if I stop going to the gym, if I'm not doing my batch meals, if I'm drinking more often than I normally do, if I'm doing this, that, the other thing, and I would go down my hit list, I want you to bring it to my attention in a way where it's not threatening, but just like, hey, I've noticed you haven't gone to the gym lately. Are you feeling okay? Or, hey, did you want to go for a run? Because it'll cue me that somebody's noticed something's going on that I may have missed, because that's what my dad started doing. He started dropping things off. So I'm like, well, maybe put these plans in place and then people will let me know. And it's worked really well. So by doing that, people do cue me and I don't catch it. So I wonder if I hadn't stumbled across that for myself, if I would have been worse off and not recognized it. But I'm lucky. I'm lucky in that respect. So.
Well, I think that is really good practical advice for everybody to hear, because we do all go through an ebb and flow in our life. Some of us have experienced the levels of clinical depression and had that recognized and gone and been able to get professional help and be able to ask for that support. A lot of people do not get to that diagnosis point because they don't recognize it themselves. And like you said, unless people have more concrete ways to know what to look out for that person, and to know through that connection that you have that, hang on a minute, there's been a change in the pattern. I mean, you yourself said it, you saw that light go out, you saw that spark go out, and yet, like any light and shadow, it's about illuminating from different perspectives. Just one small change, just 1 degree change in a light source is not going to affect the form of that shape that the light is shining on. And yet, if you were to move it 20 degrees, or if you were to look at it from different angles, then you're going to start seeing that movement. And this is exactly what you're talking about with having these different ways, having different people looking out for different things that you are dropping off in your life, to know, hang on a minute, something's changing here. What is it? Let's start that conversation. And I understand that you notice that things were dropping off. However, in the moment, those things aren't always feeling significant. And people who are contemplating suicide get to a point where their thinking starts changing from the rational, being able to ask for help, being able to start that conversation, to being so trapped in that world that the thinking becomes irrational, and it's no longer an option for them to be able to start that conversation. And it is up to those around us to be aware of that changing perspective, to try and jump in and try and connect. It's really about connection, isn't it? Trying to connect on that other level. I think that one of the most important things I'm hearing in your story is that light and the eyes, and it's that feeling. You mentioned it when you spoke about, you were in such grief when you got that phone call from your mum, that you knew, even though your daughter was only 1, she was going to react to that, whether she understood it or not. And we're talking about life and death here. We're talking about us as human beings, as spiritual people. There is so much more information that we are picking up on. So although your dad was looking at you and you saw that that spark had gone, he wasn't communicating in any other form except for feeling. How is the recipient on the other end of that? How are we better able to connect with ourselves and with that feeling, and trusting that if we've noticed something like that, it's not a big, red balloon in our face going, hey, you need to pay attention to this. It's that tiny, tiny little, something's not quite right here. How do we help ourselves tune into that, Charlene? so that we can try and start that conversation?
If I had known then what I know now, and somebody had told me that, that was around September. That's 3 months before. I'm not honestly sure, once the light goes out, that I could have, but I would have tried. And I would have tried to reintroduce and participate in being a part of helping get that person connected with what they like. And in touching on that, because you want to try and re-inspire with something that comes naturally, and just, blow a little bit on the embers. And hope that it lights. You don't know if it's going to. Sometimes you just hit it a little bit too late. But the possibility is there that if you blow just right and you stay consistent and gentle, perhaps you can fuel it enough so that it gives it enough of a push that it creates warmth again. And so with my dad, a month later was hunting season. My dad, like for a couple months leading up to hunting season, you couldn't even talk to him. He had the front lawn covered with everything. He was like out of it. He's done. He's ready to go. And that year in particular, he wasn't even into it. And he decided, this is something I hope everybody pays attention to. He decided at the last minute to change the way that he normally did his hunting trip. And I think it was a series of factors, and not that. I just think it's a bunch of contributing factors. He probably was trying to have a bit of an adventure. I assume by doing that. But he changed what he would typically do, and he tried something new, and it didn't go as expected, as my understanding of it. And then, things also continue to ripple from there. So I would just encourage people to look at what once made them happy and keep experimenting there. Just walk along with them. You don't need to bring a lot of attention to the fact that they're down and what's wrong. Focus on what's right, and focus on what usually made them happy, and speak to that space and hope that maybe it inspires it. And again, I really genuinely don't know if it would work. I really don't know. But I know that that's something, if I could go back, I would try. Or if I heard somebody in a similar experience, I would really encourage them to speak to that space. And can you imagine how cool would it be? How amazing would it be if you could just give it a blowing up where you saw the light come back on? That'd be incredible.
It
would. You have to have that awareness.
Yeah. And you're right in that you said maybe it wouldn't have made a difference to the end outcome. And I think that's really important, in that not everybody can be saved. Some people, when they've made that decision, nothing is going to change that. And I've been in discussion with a number of people. My eyes are welling up. I've been in discussion with a number of people who are there. And it's also not up to us to change their mind. We all have a life to live. I'm not condoning the behaviour. However, I am very aware that this process is a process that quite often they are guiding, and sometimes we can influence that and sometimes we can't. The important thing, I think, too, is that you were very in contact with your dad. It's not like you weren't there a lot. You were there all the time. You were around him all the time. So you had that connection, and it's important to understand that the grieving process can often come with it some guilt for those of us left here, in that, did I do enough? Could I have changed the outcome? How, just specifically talking about that aspect of it, I know that you've spoken a lot about how you've dug in and really looked there in connection to yourself, to your core self, and to trusting yourself.
how did you work through that guilt process that inevitably will always come up to some degree when we're talking about suicide? Because the thing that I love about what you're doing now is that you're opening that discussion for those of us here. People listening to this podcast are going to be a mix of people who have not been touched by suicide. God bless them. I hope that stays that way. People who have lost people they know to suicide. And there's going to be people listening here that are contemplating it. The fact that you're opening this conversation and that you're providing a space for people, a safe space for people to talk, to read your book, because sometimes we need to hear this from different perspectives. Sometimes we need to hear a voice speaking these words. Sometimes we need to see a piece of artwork that has this emotion behind it. Sometimes we need to read a book in our own space to be able to process these emotions. How did you get through that emotion of the guilt side of it?
Great question. Well, my last experience with my dad was not a positive one. I was in a very self-absorbed state of my life. I still hadn't grown up yet. I had my daughter and she birthed a new version of me, and to be quite honest, I was about a quarter of the way there at that point. We were working on a relationship, but not there. And again, I took his vacancy as disinterest to me, like he would be on his computer and just not even acknowledge me. What I didn't understand, also again important, I took the disinterest as, I don't care about you, I don't love you, I don't want anything to do with you, when really I didn't know how to connect. So at the end, our last conversation was me getting really upset with him because my daughter was sifting through his files and he just looked exhausted. He's like, Charlotte, and I just lost it. And then I walked out. And little did I know the next Monday morning that would happen. You never know. Yeah. You never know how you leave somebody. So I had a lot of guilt and regret and resentment and anger towards myself for being that way. And then I also moved through, because I really did love my dad, but I mourned the relationship I didn't have with him. I left very early on. So I made a decision to redefine how I was going to look at that time of year. My dad really loved Christmas. I loved Christmas. I didn't want to show up at that time of year. You know, I had a 1-year-old. I didn't want to show up at that time of year and be absorbed in and consumed in my own grief. I wanted to look forward and celebrate. And I was like, how do I do this? How do I reframe it? And thankfully, I have a fairly spiritual background for myself. So I identify, like I celebrate Earth religion. So there's a tradition I have where I have a Yule log. And normally there will be blessing candles on it. And as they burn, they bring blessings into people's lives. So I redid that tradition at the house. So I chose to celebrate my dad and honor him differently. In fact, I make a joke now that we get along better now because I still feel connected on an energetic level. Yeah. And I feel I receive signs from him and too many coincidences to know that energetic connection is still there, maybe on a different vibration is my belief. And, but at any rate, I wanted to celebrate through ceremony. So he had logs at the side of the house. I got everybody involved with it. We drilled holes into it. And Yule that year fell on the day of his open casket. Oh. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to handle this. I didn't like death. I didn't know what to do with this. Do I look? Do I not look? And I wanted to say goodbye. So talking about processing, what I did was, I was like, okay, I'm going to create ceremony around this. I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to release all my anger, all my sadness, all my pain, everything, all my happiness, all my joy, like everything on the paper. I'm just going to write till I can't write anymore. Whatever comes out without filter. And then when I go to his open casket, my thought was, I'm going to bring an apple to go with him, and an apple that I'm going to put on with my Yule log and stuff and my candles. And I'll just create a beautiful altar-like thing for him and celebrate him that way. but at least these other pieces will go with them. So it's symbolic, and I do the same ritual every year. So what I did was I sat down, and it was very small, quiet, just family only. And everybody had mixed, commentary about whether you look, you don't look, you're haunted. I'm like, I don't want to be haunted with something that I don't want to see. I don't know what to do. I sat there and I asked quietly for myself, sat with myself, and I said, I need to know what to do. Please give me a sign. There's got to be a sign. And I had this vision of when my cat died. I had toured for a long time in this, all over the place. And I had this fluffy Persian cat who came with me, and he died. And when he died, my dad cried more than I did. And we went into the backyard and we buried my cat. And this is the vision that came to me while I'm sitting there. My dad's in front of me in a casket. And he looked at me and he goes, you look at him. You look at him because you left him. And so I did. I was terrified. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if this would scar me for life. I picked up my apple. I had my note with me. I walked up there. It was quiet. I was shaking terribly. And then I looked down. I saw my dad, and I was so startled. Just the realization that my dad's dead. That it looked like him, but it didn't look like him. And then I threw the apple at him.
Oh, did you?
I did. That's how awkward that must have been for everyone. And I dropped the note in, and then it went right back. And I just sat there, and it was like, wow, that was just not how I envisioned that going. So, at any rate, later on, when the family was sitting around, I got comfortable with death. For me, I had some time to walk up and just look, because it wasn't gory at that time. Yeah. Thank goodness. But I just remembered all that kept sounding to me was the light, the light, the light. Don't lose your light. And I still carry that message forward very strongly today. So I went home that night, I lit my candles, and I named a bunch of the different family members. And every year I still do this. I name the candles for people who could use a little more love and light in their life, because that's what my dad represented in his life. And as the candles burn, those blessings go into their homes. And at the end of it, the last candle to go out, my daughter and I time it. And then we write down the last one that goes out. And the last one that goes out, we take all of the blessing candle wax, we create a new candle, and we gift it to that person so that when they light it, so that when they light it, his light will shine through. And so it may bring warmth and light to their life when they have a dark moment. And we look forward to that day now. Yeah. Whereas I would have dreaded it if that wasn't in place. Wow. So I want to move that forward.
Charlene, that's so powerful and beautiful, and so from the heart and that place of knowing. And I love that you trusted that vision. And I also have to say, there's the snap moment. We were talking about the alligators earlier. There's that snap reaction moment. It is, and even just to allow yourself to do that, which might not be viewed as socially acceptable by some people, just to allow yourself to react from the body is so important in those moments. And the fact that you've trusted that process, and what you're doing is you're creating that cycle with the candles and recreating the new candle to gather that energy. And like you said, we are energy. And we can pick up on the energy when we're here on Earth. Sometimes we can still pick up on that energy once someone leaves Earth. And I believe in my experiences and witnessing experiences with my child as he grew up, that when we get out of our head and society and culture, and we allow ourselves to be and to be in tune with that energy, that we can be connected to those, whether they are here or whether they have moved on. And it's so valuable what you're doing. And there again, you're bringing light and warmth and love to people around you through this process. It's just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow.
There's something else that I want to share with you too. And I've been deciding how I wanted to share this. So when I got into Movement Maker, there's a man named Pedro Deo who literally bounced into my life. I met him because Eben Pagan was running a book club, like an online. He was recording his audible version of his book called Opportunity, and here bounces in Pedro. Again, I love my symbols.
Yes.
Pedro bounces in Opportunity for everybody to come on over and check out his free Movement Maker Challenge for heart-led entrepreneurs. I'm like, oh, I gotta go check this out. This guy reminding me of my dad, so I took it as a really strong sign. Opportunity, that personality. I need to go here now. And it was at the perfect time of my life. And what birthed out of that was my Tragedy to Triumph challenge. Yes. And that one was to, I was having a really hard time understanding who needed me. And you know what? I still do. So I put this out to your podcast listeners. You guys have heard my story. Yeah. And if you have some ideas about who needs me most and in what way, I would really love some insight into that. I'm inviting that conversation because I really feel called to serve in this way, and I'm not sure how to meet it best. I met it with my book. I do book signings where I connect with people one-on-one. That's the intuitive spiritual practitioner. I seem to intuitively know how to help people through times and kind of clear the fog and help them forward. And people find a lot of value in that from me. But I feel that there's something more, and I just can't put my finger on it. So if somebody has an idea, that would be helpful. But in my challenge, I laid it out just to show what I've put in place to help me get to where I am. And I had some feedback when I was running it. And we had a big group that offered their perspectives. And I had some resistance from a couple people saying, "Whoa, Tragedy to Triumph, that's too far of a jump." And I said, for you, it might be. And for some people, it might be. But for who I need to reach, that won't be. I need people at a certain stage of acceptance. They're like, I need to know how you're not so triggered by it anymore. It's not that I don't ever get triggered. Please don't get me wrong. There are times that do get me where I really sit in my emotions, but I do honor them, accept them, acknowledge them, and release them through activity because energy requires movement. But they don't trigger me the way that it can. And I've seen a lot of people because I've given it movement purpose. So this is what I was teaching. And when I had this group, it was a very small, intimate group. And I had a very unique, unexpected situation happen. And I'll share it because this is an area that I would love to breathe some life into.
Please.
I had a participant who had lost a son through suicide. And I had another participant who had attempted suicide as a child, as the child situation. And what ended up happening through our conversations over the 5 days together was a bond and a safe space was created through us discussing soul practices of healing tangible things. And what ended up happening was they both gave each other the insight into the other person's experience in a way where it was almost like, the best way I can describe it, like a restorative justice piece.
Yeah.
I witnessed and also experienced as also being touched by suicide, a mutual healing at the same time, and this understanding of, wow, you were in your own space. It's not about love. It's not the person who is trying to end their life at that time. It wasn't about. They weren't thinking about other people. It wasn't like that. They were trying actually to make it better by not being here. They thought, it wasn't coming to you. It was to give relief.
Yeah, and protecting the ones they love. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was it. It's like so interesting. So the other person, the mother in that situation, had the opportunity. Oh, it was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen. Had the opportunity to place questions and say, is there anything I could have done? And this is where we had a conversation and some insight in a way that can't possibly have unless you're in that space.
Wow.
And even though she did not talk to her son, there's some answers in that conversation. And for the person who was experiencing it from the other perspective, I got the feedback that, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And that person even told me that they had called their mother,
Wow.
and which is beautiful. So what a gift. And I'm like, wow, that happened. That's interesting. And how do we create more of a safe space where this is a conversation where that's possible?
Yeah.
Because if people can help each other, like empathize with each other, understand each other in it just a unique way. Maybe that person just didn't feel seen or heard. I don't know what the situation may have been. But that was just a beautiful moment. And I felt it was really, really just important to share. I don't know who needs to hear that, but usually if something like that comes up so strongly, I'm like, somebody needs to hear that today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to be able to get that other perspective. And as a visual person, I'm always on about perspective, and the creative perspective for me is more than what I produce in my work. It's about how you think, and it's about allowing those opportunities, like you've just described, bringing two people with the ability to ask another who's been in that space and one who's been receiving the effects of that space, to be able to ask questions and gain more insight, even though it's not with that person that they've lost. It's with someone who understands that process and who's come out the other side and was willing to connect on that level to help someone understand. And that is so important. And that is what, as a visual artist, that's what I aim to do, is start those conversations, bring that connection with people. What you're allowing and what has happened in that group is that you've created that space for people to do this, to forge that connection, and on a heart level, to then allow that feeling to flow through to the mind to go, okay, now I can make sense of something that doesn't often have an immediate sense to us, or even a long-term sense to us, that we can spend the rest of our life wondering why. That is just huge, Charlene. I thank you so much for sharing that. And I believe that people listening are going to want to know in some way how they can be involved in that space if this speaks to them. How can they get in contact with you to do that?
Well, through my website, it's www.charlenehelm.com. I'll send you a link too.
I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. And I'm also on Facebook. Or you can get my book online. I'll give you, it'll probably give you a glare with my light here, but What Mama Says About Grief.
Wonderful.
And you have a minute, and I'd like to read it for your
Please.
parents, if you don't mind.
I would love that.
I like sharing it whenever I have the opportunity. I haven't opened it up for a while. And I am an early childhood educator, so I have to do it by the side.
Oh, please. That's the only way to do it, Charlene.
What Mama Says About Grief. Mama says I have feelings as deep blue and as wide as the sea. Sometimes they're rough and choppy, or as smooth, as calm as can be. Mama says that some feelings are heavy and other ones feel light. Some feelings help me go to sleep, while others keep me up all night.
Oh.
Mama says tears wash away my sadness when they glimmer down my cheek. It feels like I'm feeling puddles because I've cried so much this week.
Beautiful illustrations too, I must say.
Thank you. Mama says it's okay to feel glum and blue. She wants to make sure I'm okay, so talking is good to do. Mama says writing down my worries or coloring about how I feel, scribbling up my angry thoughts, these things help me heal. Mama says sometimes meditation, sometimes yoga too. Sometimes all I need are friends or something fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
Mama says remember, they're still with you every day. Sometimes people say goodbye, but their spirit always stays.
Yes.
Mama says, remember that they love you and watch you from afar. Remember them before you sleep. Blow a kiss towards the stars.
So beautiful.
Mama says, remember them in happy times and for all the fun times that you had. Celebrate how much they loved you and how that makes you glad. Mama says, my love, please don't worry because I'm here to hold you tight. So let's snuggle up with baby bear and it's hard. You'll feel all right. So that's the book. And something to remember is that children have the same thoughts, feelings, and emotions as adults, but they translate them differently because of their brain development.
Yes.
So giving an activity to pain, to grief, recognize it is blocked energy. This is a strategy-based book that I use actively in childcare to teach children how to move the identify, name, and adults should do this too. Identify, name, and feel the sensations in your body, and then give it an activity, an outlet so that it shifts. Qigong, yoga. I instruct people to grab a rock and practice tensing up and pushing their energy into the rock until they feel loose in their body. All of these different things. There's a number of ways to move it, but find some way to move it out of your body and you will feel better and you will be all right in time. You will. It will pass. Breathe into the stiffness. There will be release.
Yes, there will. And such an important point to note. I was interviewing Dr. Ashley Wellman last week, and she also wrote a children's book. And I said it about her book, and I'm going to say exactly the same about yours, in that this book is as much for adults as it is for children. That touched my heart, and it is beautiful. And the combination with the illustrator and the images that work so beautifully with the cadence of what you wrote. I'm very much a rhythm person, and the cadence of that was beautiful and tapped into that natural rhythm that I felt really spoke to me on that body level. And talking about life, talking about energy, talking about grief, talking about death, it is all part of the rhythm of life, and it is all, our body is experiencing this as much as our mind and conscious thought is. I want to thank you so much for your time today and sharing everything that you've shared so far. And this, for me, feels like the start of an ongoing conversation that people will have. I feel very honoured.
I'm so happy to be here, so happy to share with you. And I just hope that something that I said today, even if it was just one small thing, makes a positive impact in helping somebody have some different perspective and a little bit of relief. I just want to give you relief.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's the same messages that are going around in our head unanswered. It's about shining light from all those different perspectives, and one time something that someone has said is going to stick. And I'm sure that something and many things that you've said today are going to stick with some people, even if they've heard it before. It's about sometimes hearing it from a different perspective, a different source, a different voice. And we connect so strongly to the human voice, which is why I'm so drawn to the podcast medium, because in their own space, when the time is right to choose to listen and play the episodes, people will respond to hearing a human voice talking about these whole body experiences. And I thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a blessing.
Thanks, Charlene. Oh, my eyes are so red from all the crying. That was just beautiful.
Oh, good. Thank you. I really enjoyed that too. That was super fun.
Great. I thank you for your. I know you're authentic, but I thank you for your transparency today and sharing the way that you've shared in a way that I know will touch so many of the listeners over time too, because once the episodes release, they will be there, they will stay there, so that as this movement takes hold of people, as people become aware of it, they will go back and they will choose episodes, if not all of them, they will choose episodes that speak to them to listen to. And the importance of what we've talked about today, it touches so many people. I don't know the statistics, but I know that a lot of people are touched by suicide in some way. And there's not just the physical suicide, there's the metaphorical suicide too. You spoke about your dad's light going out. That was 2 months before he took his life. Some people live in that space where their light has gone out for a long, long time. And I have a strong feeling to myself right now that someone who is in that space, and many someones, are going to hear this episode and connect, and that in some way they will seek out how to find that light again. I really do feel very strongly.
I hope so. Yeah, because like I said, very transparently, I well up. I could have picked anything to do my challenge, and I well up on it every time. And I've told a number of people this. I picked the toughest topic you could probably go
Yes.
for, and really, the courage it took to launch that. I would never trade that for anything. It was a beautiful healing that needed to happen for myself too. How do I open this conversation in a different way? I can open it easily with children. I can have it with adults to a certain extent. There's a lot of people who are not ready. And those are the people, there's people going, I need what you know right now.
Yeah.
Who it is I'm best matched with, but there's somebody there. And once I figure that out, I think I can make a really, really big impact.
Yes.
Power versus force talks about the emotional vibrational scale. I can't remember how he words it, but it's talking about the different vibrations.
I'll need to read that too.
Oh, you will. I have to send you something on it. And somebody else, I think Abraham Hicks also touched on it, but I believe it started with David Hawkins. And a boyfriend had pointed me to it when I went to a very dark place and rebuilt there. And this is a few years ago. And so I've learned that energy just vibrates differently.
Yes, it does.
And how to just climb to the next best level. So that's also something I wanted to teach. How do you get from here to here? How can you recognize it in your life and actually get people to kind of workshop it like together as an experience? Let's open a conversation. How can we get from here to here? What thoughts does everybody have? And start to kind of develop our own little action plans about how we can help other people, encourage them by bringing it
like a roadmap, like a working roadmap.
Yeah, because you're not connected with your heart at that point. It's a disconnect. So you have to see something and follow it by rote and practice it and see if you can.
Yeah. But once you've come a certain level on that path, once you've traveled so far, that finish line doesn't seem so far away anymore. It's like, it is just there. I can almost touch it. And that is okay. That it is okay to be happy after you've been in such grief. It is okay to laugh again. It is okay to say that you have managed to use this adversity of losing someone to an advantage. That advantage is helping other people, at the same time filling up your own soul and helping yourself, because that journey continues. Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the Ice Acronym, I's for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things actually: connection, you are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own, and yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.